This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the globe. Get a whole month free at Mubi.com/Eyebrow Cinema.
Well, so long, Miss Mosey.
Sorry you're closing the show.
Nobody wants to come to shows no more. Kid baseball in the summer, television all the time.
Won't be much to do in town with the picture show closed.
Yeah.
It's a dark time for movie theaters. The ravages of the pandemic have accelerated already growing trends, where mid-budget movies struggle to eke even a modest profit, quickly shuffled out of theaters and rushed to VOD within weeks. And that's when mid-budget films are made at all, the last several years seeing a notable uptick in adult dramas being made as TV miniseries rather than feature films. More and more high-profile releases are foregoing the theatrical experience entirely, premiering instead directly to streaming. Even Knives Out, an unambiguous success which demonstrated that mid-budget, non-franchise films could in fact thrive theatrically, still saw its sequel thrown into the streaming model, given only the most scarce and minimal theatrical window. Only the biggest franchises and IPs are guaranteed theatrical space, and in fact monopolize screens and showtimes. But even the billions of dollars brought in by the likes of Marvel and Top Gun didn't stop Cineworld from filing for bankruptcy this September. In the face of such decline, there is also a feeling of acceptance. An attitude which sees the very concept of movie theaters as archaic in an era of streaming and HD televisions. From this perspective, the failure of mid-budget movies in theaters is hardly surprising. Only the biggest and most spectacular entertainments demand the big screen. The theatrical experience has itself fallen under scrutiny, criticized for being expensive and often unpleasant, ruined by patrons who can't stop talking or pulling out their phones. Perhaps the loudest criticism came this summer from director team the Russo Brothers, who decried the theatrical experience as elitist.
A thing to remember, too, is it's an elitist notion to be able to go to a theater. It's very fucking expensive. So this idea that was created, that we hang on to, that the theater is a sacred space, is bullshit.
I find all this a little sad. I do hold on to the movie theater as a sacred space. I've loved going to the movies since I was a little kid, and it remains my favorite pastime, a source of many a treasured memory. Even looking past my own romanticized view of the theater, I also believe it is simply, unequivocally, the best way to see any movie. Much as I love the abundance of titles offered through streaming and rewatching my favorite movies on Blu-ray, home viewing just cannot compare to the richness and immersion of the movie theater. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. In this video, I aim to make the case that not only are movie theaters still relevant, but may in fact be more vital now than ever before. But first, let's break down this claim that movie theaters are elitist. How expensive is theater going really? And how do those expenses compare to those of streaming? For this comparison, let's use my home country of Canada as an example, and round all costs to the nearest even number. The biggest theater chain in the country is Cineplex, where the average ticket costs $14 Canadian. Now, this is just the entry-level price, and it can be upgraded. Ultra AVX, Ultra AVX 3D, IMAX 3D, and 4DX each bring a modest price hike, to say nothing of the costs of snacks and soda. However, I feel these costs should be qualified. Ticket upgrades are not available for every film, and are in fact reserved for only the biggest tentpole releases, usually in limited quantities. Moreover, while the upgrade option is rare, it actually being desirable is even rarer. With 3D, occasionally you'll get an Avatar or a Gravity where the director is using the technology to provide a unique experience. But most of the time, 3D is just slapped on top of an existing movie. At best a modest amusement, at worst an active distraction. You might think that's just my opinion, but given the continual decline of 3D box office and 3D screenings since 2010, I think it's fair to say the average theater goer agrees that 3D is rarely worth it. Most IMAX screens, meanwhile, are actually digital IMAX screens, nicknamed LIMAX because they're only about a third of the size of a proper IMAX screen. And 4DX theaters are rather rare. My city doesn't have a single one. In sum, not only is the basic ticket price of $14 the most common option, it is also, in my estimation, the most desirable, and therefore the cost I'll be using as the default average for a single movie theater ticket. The cost of snacks is a thornier matter. Certainly, concessions add a great deal to the cost of theater going, but for the purposes of this comparison, I will not be including this cost. For one, the sheer variety in food options makes it difficult to lock down any average dollar amount. Prices will vary a lot depending on if you're a popcorn guy or a hot dog gal or a nacho man, or if you even get snacks at all. I also have no way of comparing the preset snacks sold at a theater to the endless items a person might choose to eat at home. People like to present movie theater food as uniquely expensive, but unless at home you're eating tomatoes from a vegetable garden, you probably had to pay for those snacks too. Without a reliable metric, I'm going to have to omit the cost. This comparison will strictly concern access to the movies themselves. So let's talk streaming costs. Netflix offers several different plans, running as low as $6 a month for an ad-supported service, to as high as $21 a month for maximum devices and 4K streaming. Optimal plans will vary by user, but I think the following criteria offers a good balance of quality and affordability. Ad-free, streaming in 1080p, and access to unlimited movies on the platform. The standard plan delivers exactly that at $16.50 a month. Cost here is slightly higher than one standard theater ticket, but that ticket only covers one movie, as opposed to the unlimited viewings you pay for with Netflix. But of course, Netflix isn't the only streamer in town. Even if we exclude niche services like Mubi, Criterion Channel, and Shudder, and only focus on platforms debuting tentpole blockbusters, if you want to see more than just Netflix movies, you're gonna have to shell out more dough. Prime Video and Paramount Plus each come in at $10 a month, while Apple TV is a smidge cheaper at $9 a month. Crave, which is where Warner Brothers releases go in Canada, costs a whopping $20 a month. There is a cheaper option, but that plan is for mobile devices only and does not allow for streaming media on a TV, which makes it less than worthless, in my opinion.
It's such a sadness that you think you've seen a film on your fucking telephone. Get real.
Disney Plus comes in at $12 a month, but this of course does not include the Premiere Access fee that was attached to new releases like Mulan or Cruella when they first debuted, which in Canada cost an additional $35 per movie on top of a monthly subscription. Imagine paying $47 to watch Cruella. Now, Disney hasn't used this model since Jungle Cruise in July of 2021, but the precedent has been set. And given the financial black hole a lot of streaming services currently find themselves in, it's not unreasonable to expect similar additional fees may pop up in the future. For those of you asking, what about Peacock? Not currently available in Canada. If we Canucks want to see Halloween Ends opening weekend, we've got to do it in a theater. Based on these numbers, access to the major streaming catalogs dropping new releases is going to cost a total of $77.50 a month, with a potential extra $35, hovering just in case Disney wants to squeeze a little extra juice from their hottest new release. Comparatively, if you are heading to the movie theater once a week, a frequency that is well above average, that would only cost you $56 a month. Now, you might object to these numbers, and to be fair, you'd have a point. For one, my comparison assumes an individual. but if you're paying for a partner or kids at the theater, that $56 can balloon rather quickly, while streaming costs are fixed, regardless of how many people are in the room watching with you. Streaming also offers a much wider variety of options, and assuming you watch more than 5 movies every month, you are paying less than you would be to see those films in a theater. But my point here isn't to say that streaming is de facto more expensive than the theater. It's to dispute the notion that streaming is some sort of working man's alternative to the elitism of the movie theater. Because streaming is very fucking expensive. It might not feel like it in the moment, because the nature of subscription services automatically charging your credit card makes the payment seem invisible. With streaming specifically, it's easy to fall into thinking that such and such movie is free on Netflix or on Prime, subconsciously overlooking the fact that you're paying for that access in the first place. And those costs add up. Now, the diligent consumer can take time to manage their subscription services carefully, signing up for a given service only when something specific interests them, or binging through catalog titles in concentrated bursts, rather than carrying every service month to month. But this level of attention requires someone who's pretty dedicated and attentive to their viewing habits. Unless you're willing to put a lot of time and effort into managing your subscriptions, you're likely to just forget, and streaming companies are in fact counting on it. It's why so many free trials still require your credit card information. You don't have to choose to sign up for them to profit. You just have to forget to cancel. And this is only bolstered by the rising prevalence of annual subscriptions. Prime Video, Crave, and Disney Plus all offer a discount if you sign up for a year rather than going month to month. Sounds like a good deal, but the one-time payment makes it even easier to forget about when renewal time comes around, and to lose track of how much you're really spending. It's also important to remember that the subscription fees are not the only cost barrier to streaming. A whole infrastructure is required for streaming to be a viable option in the first place. You're going to need a high-speed internet connection. Netflix recommends a minimum download speed of 5 megabytes per second to stream 1080p video reliably, but this is an incredibly generous estimate. You're more likely to need a minimum of 50 megabytes per second, which in Ontario is going to cost about $60 a month. And that's if you have access to those kinds of speeds in the first place. Homes in rural areas generally have far slower internet available, with the average speed of 21 megabytes per second falling well short of the speed required to stream in HD. Being able to stream on an actual television instead of just a computer screen, or worse yet, a cell phone, also requires extras. Either a smart TV with streaming app support, a gaming console, or an external device like Chromecast to cast your streams to a TV. Now, it should be said that a lot of these costs are fairly typical expenses of modern life. High-speed internet is becoming increasingly common and increasingly necessary for most people, and TV sets have been a prominent fixture of the average North American home since the 1950s. But all the same, it's important to recognize the degree of financial barriers and logistical complexities to streaming. In this context, the simplicity of the theater is rather appealing. A film catches your interest, you head to the theater, pay your $14, watch it, and go home. Moviegoing need not be any more complicated than that. And while still a privilege that, to be sure, not everyone can afford, movie theaters are in fact a lot less expensive than other forms of entertainment and leisure. Compare the $14 movie theater ticket to the hundreds of dollars for sporting events or concerts. Compare the $14 you'd spend to see the latest blockbuster, or hell, even the $25 if you want to splurge for the 4DX experience, to the $80 to $90 you'd spend on a new AAA video game. I can also guarantee that you can get into any movie in Canada cheaper than you can any theme park. Well, unless we're talking about the MCU. Am I right, fellas? But seriously, for a form of entertainment criticized as elitist, movie theaters are remarkably more affordable than their reputation suggests. And that's a good thing, because theaters are still the best way to see any movie. A common logline to justify the decline of the movie theater is that home viewing standards have risen to such a degree that the theatrical experience is no longer necessary. I don't buy this for a second. For starters, it really throws a wrench in the whole movie theaters are elitist argument when that position is counterpointed by a home theater setup of massive 4K TV sets and surround sound, which can very easily run costs in the several thousands of dollars. Even looking past issues of price, home viewing is still no substitute for the theater. It isn't just that even the biggest home televisions still fall short of theater screens, but the standards of home presentation are unreliable. Consider the litany of issues plaguing modern TVs, particularly when it comes to watching movies. Motion smoothing, which makes films look cheap and artificial. Poor calibration, which makes black levels unreadable and messes with the color grading of a film. If you have a TV from the 2010s, you might have to deal with overscan, where the edges of the frame are cut off, and you're not actually getting the full picture. A lot of these problems can be addressed or solved by an attentive owner, but you really need to do your research. The options to solve these issues buried in settings menus and unclear language. Still, these problems are surmountable. Most TV presentation issues can be fixed with a little research, and one need not indulge in the highest end of home theater electronics for quality home viewing. But at the end of the day, home viewing is too full of distractions to match the immersion of a movie theater. This is the defining feature of the cinematic experience. The dark room, giant screen, surround sound, and removal of external factors all culminate in a total absorption, with nothing to get in the way of you and the movie. And though it might seem like this scale of grand immersion is best suited to spectacle, smaller movies are actually the ones that benefit the most. Don't get me wrong, I love the thrill of seeing a big, epic movie with earth-shattering sound and a massive screen. But there are subtleties to be found in seeing intimate, small-scale stories in a theater too. And those subtleties can be easily lost when watched at home. Take a movie like The Humans. On paper, this is exactly the kind of small-stakes drama that might seem skippable in theaters. The film is a stage adaptation about interpersonal family conflicts which come to light during Thanksgiving dinner. The whole movie is set in one apartment and consists almost entirely of long dialogue scenes. There isn't really anything resembling a set piece until the end, at which point the film starts to feel a bit like a horror movie, with its sense of claustrophobia and the feel of an impending force which comes to bear. It might seem like this comes from out of nowhere, but there are all sorts of nuances to the filmmaking which slowly build to this point. So much of the movie is filmed in distant long shots, framed to deliberately obscure the faces of the characters. The film's sound design emphasizes every creak, echo, and flicker of the space. The lighting is dark. The environment is sparse. The culmination of these choices is an alienating, disconcerting movie, one which slowly gets under your skin, well before its narrative developments really twist the knife. Or at least, it does if you're paying attention, immersed in the film's story and attentive to these directorial choices. But if you're watching at home, in between browsing Twitter, checking emails, and performing chores, it's far too easy to lose sight of these nuances. To see The Humans as a movie where nothing much happens until the end when things get weird. There's a quote I really like from Alexander McKendrick. What a film director really directs is the audience's attention. Where you point the camera, how images are composed, what moves and what remains static, what is lit and what is cast in shadow, all this and more are integrated to organize what we do and don't see, what registers consciously and what registers unconsciously. And it's much harder to direct that attention when the audience is at home, awash in distraction, particularly when a film is defined by subtle indication rather than overt demand. I've used The Humans as my central example here, but it's far from alone. Tar is one of the best and most acclaimed films of the year, and it's also exactly the kind of slow burn character study that can lose a great deal of its power when watched inattentively. If you reach for your phone every time it doesn't seem like the plot is being moved forward, it's easy to miss how these seemingly plotless moments are in fact essential to the storytelling and to developing the film's themes. And this lack of distraction is not merely a benefit for contemporary, small-scale human stories. Apocalypse Now has been one of my all-time favorite movies for many years now, but I got a whole new appreciation for the film when I saw it in a movie theater last spring. It isn't just that the images were bigger and the sounds louder, although to be clear that was also awesome, it's that the immersion of the theater meant I had no escape from the film's hypnotic spectacle, or spiral into madness. There was no temporary checkout to read messages from my mates, or to see the newest video's stats. I was locked in with Willard. It might seem the solution here is to just put away the phone when watching movies at home. And that's all well and good in theory, but much harder in practice. The reinforcement rewards offered by smartphones and the apps they host incentivize continued use, while the very act of checking one's phone is so habitual it becomes unconscious. You might not even realize you're reaching for your phone until a bright screen is staring back at you. And as much as I've used the pronoun you throughout this video, this is not me looking down on the plebs, unable to put Facebook away and appreciate cinema. I struggle just as much with this as the next guy, and that's a massive part of why I love the movie theater. It removes the distraction of the cell phone, and all other distractions for that matter. This might be a controversial point, as I frequently hear horror stories online about how awful the theatrical experience is. Movies ruined by noisy patrons who won't stop chatting or scrolling social media. I can't comment on these stories, and there are no stats to speak to the percentage of film screenings ruined by disruptive patrons, but in my experience, such distraction is remarkably rare. In the hundreds of times I've gone to the movies in my life, I can count on two hands the number of times a viewing has been notably compromised by rude theatergoers. And even on these few occasions, most times the disruptive person stopped whatever they were doing when I very politely asked them to.
Hey, buddy, down in front!
Alternatively, my home viewing has frequently been disrupted, sometimes by the idle scroll, sometimes because my concentration is interrupted by some news story, and sometimes because I'm beckoned by a notification from work. In the context of these interruptions, the theater becomes more than just the ideal environment for watching movies, but a reprieve from the psychological weight of always being online. Possibly the only reprieve we have left. I don't want to make myself out to be some sort of Luddite. I love my phone and the access to media and interconnectivity it offers me on a daily basis. But being connected all the time also has consequences. Unfettered access to 24-hour news cycles enables doom scrolling, an unhealthy form of news consumption defined by an obsessive fixation on tragic and horrible news stories to the point of despair and exhaustion. Ease of communication has blurred the line between working hours and free time. Workers frequently engaged in work-related communications in their off time, a problem so pervasive some countries have begun introducing legislation to combat these harms. that phone use is so widespread when engaging in leisure, in concerts, sporting events, restaurants, or simply when relaxing at home, makes even temporary escape all the more difficult. The movie theater is one of the few remaining spaces where these connections are severed, where rules are in place to turn off your phone, to shut out the weight of the world's problems, to disconnect from the burden of work. If one of the defining virtues of the movies is escapism, then movie theaters today offer the purest and most literal escapism possible. And this is why I find the indifference, or worse yet, the acceptance, to the growing struggles faced by movie theaters so sad. Far from being archaic, the escapism of the theater is more necessary now than ever before, and to throw that away just because it's easier to stream a movie at home is a profound waste. Movie theaters may not be elitist, but they are a privilege, one we should cherish for as long as we can, because there's nothing else like them. Thank you to Mubi for sponsoring this video. Mubi is a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great works of cinema from around the world. From iconic directors to emerging auteurs, there's always something new to discover. I've talked a lot about the joys of the movie theater today, and to that end, I'd like to recommend the second season of Mubi Podcast. Titled Only in Theaters, this acclaimed audio documentary series is all about lifting up the cinema, with stories of how the movie theater has influenced film history. As someone who holds a special place in my heart for movie theaters, I cannot recommend this podcast enough. Series guests include filmmakers like Barbette Schroeder, Mary Herron, and Alejandro Jodorowsky, and critics like Jay Haberman and Amy Nicholson. You can listen to Mubi Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, you can get 30 days of Mubi streaming for free right now at Mubi.com/eyebrowcinema. That's a whole month of great cinema for free.